I've recently been watching a lot of Complexity and have been impressed by how often they seem to win the second round Forcebuy. And with flashy and eye-catching plays like this,
3 incredible headshots and a default fourth as well.
It's easy to see why I get excited. But sometimes these flashy plays can bias us into thinking a team is good in Forcebuys when maybe they aren't actually that good and they just have a few rounds like this. So I decided to look up the stats to see how good Complexity were in these Forcebuys, and wow. They are by far the best team in the world at winning these second round Forcebuys with an over 50% win rate. In fact, against top 30 teams, Complexity have a better win rate in their second round Forcebuys than they do in pistol rounds, which is just ridiculous. So I thought I'd have to see how they do it, and I jumped in with some examples. Let's use that round you just saw as our first example. Obviously, the main takeaway is Config being a beast, but there are lots of other things that contributed to Complexity being in this position in the first place. In fact, at the start of this round, Complexity were running a standard 2A, 1 mid, and 2B setup with Config towards the B side of the map. And these default setups are pretty common for Complexity on these CT Forcebuys, with some freedom to make solo plays. And it's only once Poison dies off on the other side of the map trying to take a fight with blameF attempting to run distraction, that Complexity then decide to rotate and gamble stack. And that's because once you're down in this 4v5 with a bit of information, it's very unlikely you're going to win the round just by sitting back in a default. And it's also not the end of the world if you pick the wrong site, because saving these guns into the next round where you'd otherwise have to fully eco wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Looking at the specific fights themselves, we can start by looking at Cadian's POV of this push, which comes from a pretty awkward and uncomfortable angle to begin with. And because Rush is playing this unexpected off angle out in the open, it's very difficult for Cadian to be ready for this angle and be ready to fight both these players. So it's an easy kill for Config on a player not looking at him. These next 2 kills are more down to Config being a stone cold killer, but they do have blameF and Oboe waiting in the wings, and they also have Oboe throwing this nade through. So even if Config just landed shots to the body, this nade might be enough to get the kill and would at least soften these players up so that if Config did go down, there would be some easier fights for both blameF and Oboe. And then at the end here, poor Nico doesn't know where to look. He is running into the lion's den here. blameF had even put down this defensive smoke earlier with little gaps around it, which are awkward to deal with, and blameF is able to get this AK, so Nico is always going to be in a pretty tough spot here. But you get to see how this is a mix of Complexity landing some really good shots and having some good plans in case they don't land the shots. Complexity employ these same concepts on the T side, where they often spread out at the start of rounds to play for picks. Here's an example of it on Nuke, where blameF gets the early kill over at Yard. Having Deegs and AKs, which are capable of getting one-shot headshot kills, gives Complexity the freedom to be able to spread out like this when they know they're probably against SMGs for the most part. And then once the initial fights go down, Complexity often then regroup and use their strength in numbers to take a position. This is especially effective in this round because if you take a look at the minimap, as soon as Roy dies over at Yard, A-Core has to plug this gap, and you can be fairly certain that there are likely going to be 2 players on the A side of the map. So you know that Ramp is going to be fairly vulnerable at this point. It's fairly likely there's only 1 man here, and Complexity are able to brute force their way down to B. I actually think Asilian does a pretty solid job here at slowing them down with the molly, which gets smoked out, and getting 2 kills towards the B site, buying time for the rotate, but Config with this 1 AK is able to turn things around with 2 important kills, make sure that Complexity stay on top. And again, once they've got the man advantage, Complexity are really solid at just sticking together, making sure they trade out to victory. And that's why Complexity spread out to begin with. Getting that first pick is what helped them get to the B site and helped them be able to group up much more confidently. As much as there are some rounds like this where I can talk about some overall concepts that Complexity employ in these Forcebuys, there has to be some consideration for just how good this team is individually. And this is an example of one of those rounds, where Complexity play their standard setup on the CT side. blameF even gets smoked out of window, which leaves only Oboe and Poison on the A side of the map. And I say only Oboe and Poison, turns out they do more than enough on this hold. Oboe gets some great Deeg shots, Poison with some great scout shots in from the back lines as well. And then blameF follows through with 1 kill towards mid as well. One of the nice things about Complexity though is they release some of their comms on their YouTube channel, so let's take a listen in on the masterminds.
Nice. Oh, stand up, boys! Stand up!
Okay, not quite the masterminds I made them out to be. But memes aside, I think there genuinely is something to be said for the culture and the vibe of this team being very open, very free-flowing, and very willing for players to be able to take risks. You can hear in these comms it's not a super structured team where you're going to get yelled at if you try and make a play, and you see that in some of these rounds where players go for pushes with the Deegs. Like in this round where Config's allowed to try and take the top mid fight early even though he loses it. Then once they go down a man, they group up towards mid and start to use their smokes to get up into short, and that is just a stunning shot from Rush. From here, they continue to push into the B bomb site and again do a good job on the spacing, sticking together, and just landing good shots throughout. Rush ends up getting 3 kills here. Poison lands a nice shot with the Deagle as well. And after turning this into a scrappy round and into a 1v1 at the end, Poison is able to clutch it out. I also want to point out that in these rounds I've showed so far, every single player from Complexity has stepped up. In the first round, it was Config who won them the round by himself. Then in the next one, it was blameF getting the opening on Nuke and much more of a team effort. Then on Mirage, it was Oboe and Poison on that A site hold, and this time, Rush and Poison get involved on the B site. And so having so many players capable of stepping up in these rounds is obviously a big part as to why Complexity is so successful in them. Oh, and to be fair to Config, let's show another example on Mirage where he does get the opening kill. Bang! Great shot onto short, opens up the round for Complexity and gives them all sorts of options. One of the things that was most exciting about this team when they came onto the scene was just the clear confidence that these players showed in that win against Astralis back at Blast. That clearly shows up in these Forcebuy rounds too. And then the nice thing about this second round on Mirage from Complexity is they kind of use the same smokes here that they did in the previous round. They smoke the back of connector, they smoke window, but this time they use those smokes to go towards the A side. So this makes them even less predictable because they have multiple options off the back of these same smokes. This time round, it's Oboe who gets some of the early kills, trading out the first one from his teammates' information. And then brace yourselves, guys. This next shot is ridiculous. Be careful or you might get whiplash from this one. Wait for it. Wait for it. Okay, keep waiting. There we go. That shot is just ridiculous and shows the kind of fun stuff Complexity are capable of. Then once it goes into the 2v2, Poison just does a good job at drawing the attention away from blameF for this first fight, and then blameF plays the 1v1 well. Again, it's another round that comes close, which is quite common in these second rounds, but even bringing it close is already quite the accomplishment. And then once it goes down to those clutch scenarios, Complexity are generally pretty damn good at winning them. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I tried to use a good mix of some of the concepts that Complexity use, as well as just showing their raw skill, because that's obviously what wins them quite a few of these rounds. Oh, and the final note is how efficient Complexity are with their nades, because oftentimes you only have a few smokes in these rounds, and Complexity are really good at putting them in the right spots. Anyway, that is going to be me done for the day. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe, because that just makes sense. And I'll catch you next time.